What's goody, all you lovers of dark and mysterious stories that are 100% true? I'm Gypsie Kim, and today on Tragic Turns, we're about to take a journey back into time. Way back. Before we get started, I just want to thank you lovely people who've been subscribing and visiting my very new channel. I appreciate all of you guys taking a chance on me, and I can already tell you guys are great at making life choices. Just the type of people I need in my inner circle. This story is so intriguing, so many twists that are just mind-boggling, confusing, and definitely epitomizes the term conspiracy theory. Unfortunately, we are going to be discussing deaths of children, so please brace yourselves for that. There's quite a few names that we need to keep track of, so I'm going to do my best to give you visuals to help you out, but I'm going to need you to dig in there deep in your childhood brain power and summon up that imagination, because at some points it's a little bit hard to find the right photos to illustrate things just due to the age of this case. Now, my ongoing disclaimer is that the opinions I express in all of my videos are strictly my own. I ain't no doctor, lawyer, scientist. I ain't no professional. I'm just a stay-home mom on the interwebs, contributing my voice to these heart-wrenching stories so that hopefully you, me, and future generations will learn something useful from these experiences of other people. Be sure to leave me a like and some comments below so that others like you can find this content faster. My channel is still very new, so please join the audience club by hitting the subscribe button so you don't miss anything. I'm hella honored that y'all are choosing to let me chill with you as you drive, eat, cook, put them babies down for a nap, or just to fall asleep to. Now let's do this, y'all. For almost 40 years straight, a prominent billboard along Route 16 in Fayetteville, West Virginia, showcased the images of 5 children. 14-year-old Maurice, Martha age 12, Louis only 9, Jenny 8, and 5-year-old Betty. This small town was marked by speculation and rumors surrounding the mysterious disappearances of these siblings, whose family home was engulfed in a Christmas Eve fire in 1945. Okay, I know what you're thinking. What mysterious disappearance, Gypsy? You just told us the family home went up in flames. I think it's pretty obvious what happened here, genius. Nah, I feel you. And that's a reasonable assumption. Who wouldn't think that? I did. But when you hear the details of the story, I promise you're gonna be surprised. Once upon a time, in a place called Tula, Sardinia in 1895, Giorgio Sodder entered our world. He later immigrated to the United States of America in 1908 when he was just 13 years young. In the USA, his name was changed to George Sodder, probably to make it easier for us dumb Americans to pronounce and remember his ethnic sounding name. Strangely, George had an older brother escorting him to Ellis Island, but as soon as they arrived safely in the States, Big Bro ditched him and went right on back to Italy. Resourceful little Georgie got a job working on the Pennsylvania railroads, where his duties included carrying water and supplies to the men that were working there. Some years later, he found himself relocating to Smithers, West Virginia. I'm sorry, I gotta say it like that. Smithers.
Smithers.
I'll give you the beating of your life.
I'm giving you the beating of your life.
Let me stop. Focus, people. Back to George Sodder. This kid was really smart and very focused. Unlike me, he was a hard worker already from a young age. He started working as a driver at first, and then he went on to own his own trucking company where he hauled dirt to construction sites and later freight and coal that was mined in the area. It was around this time when he met his future wife. She was the daughter of a store owner. The store was called the Music Box, and the girl's name was Jenny Cipriani, and she too was originally from Italy but had moved to the States with her family at the age of 3. They married and settled in Fayetteville, West Virginia, an Appalachian town with a small but active Italian immigrant community. And between 1923 and 1943, they had 10 children. You heard me right, I said 10. 10 enfants. 10 niños. 이 식구가 아이들 10명을 낳습니다. 1 next to 0. They lived in a 2-story timber frame home about 2 miles or 3.2 kilometers north of town. According to an official in the county, the Sodders were known as one of the most respected middle-class families around. George was known for openly expressing his strong opinions about everything from business to current events, and politics, and he often rubbed people the wrong way with his outspoken tendencies. Nonetheless, the family was still very respected, I think because of George's reputation as a successful business person. People really didn't seem to like his opposition, though, to the Italian dictator Benito Mussolini, which caused him to butt heads severely with other Italian immigrants in the local community. But for all of his outspokenness, George was very reluctant to talk about his youth back in Italy, and he didn't really go into much detail explaining why he had left at such a young age to start a new life on his own. It's extraordinary to think that there are people out there who were on their own since their early teens and somehow they just go on to make a life for themselves without ending up homeless, in jail, or dead at a young age. Have you guys seen the viral interview on Club Shay Shay where comedian Katt Williams speaks about his own childhood and background? He left home at 13 years old with a pocket full of cash and a pet dog and hitchhiked from Ohio to Miami, Florida. And he never went back. It's monumental what he accomplished in a very short amount of time with no parental guidance. When I hear about experiences like these, it makes me feel less stressed about life's hardships. I remind myself that if they figured it out, I can figure it out. It really makes you grateful for those advantages you have that may not even seem like something worth weighing heavily. Like having a good relationship with the elders in your life, having a warm home to come to when you've been out in the world, dealing with school, work, whatever else is a part of your daily routines. Now let's fast forward to 1942, when the last Sodder baby, Sylvia, was born. At this point, their second oldest son, Joe, who was 21 years old, had already enlisted in the military, and he'd gone off to fight in World War II. The next year, Mussolini was removed from power and executed. Now remember what I told you about Mussolini and George's strong opinions about politics and the beefs that he managed to entangle himself in with the people from his community. This is going to play a role in the story later, and you're going to see why. You see, 2 years later, on Christmas Eve of 1945, George and Jenny Sodder were home with all but one of their 10 kids, Joe, the son who was off in the military. The oldest daughter, Marion, who was 19, had a job at the local dime store in downtown Fayetteville, and she surprised 3 of her younger sisters that day with gifts that she had purchased for them. Aw, what a sweet sister. The sisters that she treated were Martha, who was 12, Jenny, age 8, and little Betty, age 5. Understandably, the girls were too excited to just go to bed, so they begged their mother to let them stay up later so that they could open up some of the toys. Alright, it's around 10 p.m. now, and Jenny, the mom, agrees to let the kids stay up a little bit longer if the 2 brothers who were still awake, which was 14-year-old Maurice and 9-year-old Louis, would promise to take care of the cows and the chickens before they went off to bed. At this stage, George and his 2 oldest boys, John, who was 22, and George Jr., age 16, they were already in bed because they were exhausted after working all day with their dad. Goodness. On Christmas Eve, so the deal was finish up the last of the chores and y'all could stay up and open a couple of gifts. Then she took the baby Sylvia, who was 2 at the time, upstairs with her, and they went to bed. The baby shared a room with the parents. Around 12:30 a.m., officially Christmas morning now, the phone rings and Jenny had to come downstairs in order to answer it. So I just want to make a point here that there's 2 Jennys in the story. We've got Mom Jenny and then we've got 5-year-old Jenny. So when Mom Jenny answers the phone, she heard a female voice asking for someone. She didn't recognize the voice or the name that was mentioned by this woman. And then she said she heard cackling laughter and glasses clinking in the background like somebody was at a party giving a toast. After telling the caller that they had the wrong number, Jenny hung up and was about to head back to bed, but then she noticed that all the downstairs curtains were wide open, every single light was still turned on, the front door was also unlocked. Now, Marion, the teenage daughter, had fallen asleep on the sofa in the living room. When Jenny noticed her there, she just assumed that the rest of the kids were upstairs in their rooms asleep. Just like kids to forget all them final details. Like I'm always creeping around my house at 2 a.m. on my way to the bathroom, having to check doors and lock some windows, stove tops in case my kids forgot something. Even though I look them dead in their faces and be like, don't forget to put the dishes away, wipe down the counters, pay the internet bill. Like, do you think they do it? No. What's a mom gotta do to get 1 month's worth of internet bills out of their 12-year-old? Am I asking too much? Jeez, I gotta do every damn thing around here. But enough about my ungrateful kids. Can we focus, people? Back to the Sodders. After turning off all the lights, closing the curtains, and securing the lock on the front door, Jenny Sodder went back to her room and started to drift into slumber when she was startled out of her sleep by a loud bang on the roof, followed by the sound of something rolling. Then she paused to listen for a bit to see if there were any other noises. She doesn't hear anything, so then she goes back to sleep. About an hour later, around 1:30 a.m., she's awakened again because she smelled the smoke that was clouding up the air in her room. Jenny jumps out of bed to find George's office room was on fire. So Jenny woke up her husband, alerting him to the danger, and that's when George immediately springs into action. He wakes up his 2 oldest sons. George valiantly did what he could to save his children, y'all, although initially he and a handful of them had gotten out of the house safely. The parents and the 4 kids, Marion, who was downstairs, Sylvia the baby, John and George, the 2 oldest sons that he woke up, they were initially able to escape the burning house. Everybody was yelling feverishly to the children who they assumed were stuck upstairs, but no one was calling back. No one could approach the stairs that led up to the kids' rooms because it was already ablaze. There are some reports where they say that the children who were left in the house were sleeping in the attic. So I'm guessing that there was the first floor, then the second story where the mom and the 2 older sons were. I'm guessing there was an attic upstairs from them, and that's where the other children probably were asleep. George decided to go back into the blazing home through a broken window. Once he had already gotten outside, he suffered some injuries because he broke that window to get in, and he was moving through the house trying to find the various children amidst the flames. But despite his efforts, visibility was really low inside due to the smoke and the fire taking over the entire downstairs portion of the home. By now, most of the rooms were in flames or smoky. But where the hell were the rest of the clan? Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty were all still missing. Their 2 bedrooms were located on opposite ends of the hallway, but they were separated by a staircase, and that staircase was completely covered in ferocious flames, untouchable. Trying to think of another way to get to his trapped children, Mr. Sodder sprinted back outside the house. Maybe he could figure out a way through their bedroom windows? But when he went for the ladder that was usually leaning against the side of the house, that was nowhere to be found. George didn't give up though. He had this brilliant idea to grab his coal truck and try to park it against the side of the home and just climb up to the windows. This dad is a superhero if I ever saw one. But unfortunately, his idea never saw reality because both of his coal trucks were not starting, and this was a huge shock because they were working fine just the day before. Now what? George went so far as to look for some water that was collected in a rain barrel, but of course, that had to go wrong too. The water was literally frozen into a block of ice and totally useless. At this stage, he was bleeding, frantic. He had a sore throat from shouting his children's names at the top of his lungs. I cannot even imagine what this must have been like for these parents. But don't worry, George. I know it's 1945, but we still have telephones and a fire department, and we can call for help. But sadly, it's 1945, and services were much worse than they are these days. You know how back in the day, when you picked up your phone, there was an operator that had to patch you through to whatever number you were trying to dial? That's how it was in America back then. Well, their daughter, Marion, she tried calling the Fayetteville Fire Department from a nearby home, and would you believe it? The operator just didn't pick up. Simultaneously, there was a neighbor who could see the home on fire, and they tried to make a call to get help. But alas, all the operators seemed to be unavailable. Perhaps they were sleeping on the job because nobody was hardly making calls at 1 a.m. back in those days. I heard a rumor once that America was pretty boring after nightfall back then, so like, who'd be making late night phone calls on a regular basis, right? There's no internet, there ain't no nightclubs, you just drink moonshine and knit and read Bible verses for entertainment. How do you think the Sodders ended up with 10 kids? Come on. They had to keep themselves entertained somehow. Alright, stop distracting me, you guys. This is not a history lesson, and most of my speculation about the 40s is based on my imagination only. Focus people back to the fire. So the neighbor that tried to call for help, they get frustrated. They decide they're just gonna physically go looking for the fire chief, whose name is F.J. Morris. And this dude, Chief Morris, he sounds the alarm, which back in those days required one firefighter to call another one, and then another one, and then another one, and so on and so forth. So like, what? These firemen were literally playing telephone during a life and death emergency? Bruh. This system was so efficient that despite being located only 2.5 miles from the home, the fire department's crew got to the house only a handful of hours later at 8 in the morning. Remember, the fire started around 1 a.m. Later, Fire Chief Morris stated that, listen, he was further slowed down due to being unable to drive the fire truck. And he had to wait until somebody showed up who could drive it. What in the world? Have you ever heard of such a thing? How in the hell do you get to be the chief, not the janitor, not the cafeteria worker, not the receptionist, but the head firefighter, the chief, and you can't even drive the fire truck? How is that not the main requirement? Like, I swear, y'all, only in America. I can't.
This is America.
Now, how much of the Sodders' home do you think was left intact by the time these heroic firemen got to the scene? If you guessed none, then you are today's lucky winner, my friend, because the whole damn house was in a heap of ashes. Yes, it was. In all fairness, I don't know how much it would have mattered if the firefighters weren't so held up, as the house was totally demolished within 45 minutes. But heavens, the firehouse was only 2.5 miles away. It didn't take no 45 minutes to drive under 3 miles. That is, unless you're waiting on AAA for a tow. I don't know. Maybe I'm just a little too creative. I'm just thinking too much outside the box. It's under 3 miles. They ain't have no cows. They ain't have no horses. They ain't have no other way to get like some buckets of water to this house. I swear, if people had just walked to the house with water, like, it would have been faster than waiting for the fire truck. I don't know. Maybe I'm just thinking too deep about this. So the family had no choice but to just watch their house turn into rubble, and now the Sodders faced a grim reality. A search on Christmas Day revealed no remains. Therefore, the parents, George and Jenny, figured that their children, the 5 kids that were left inside the house, must have been deceased. Chief Morris theorized that the bodies had to have been cremated in the intense heat. After a state police inspector went over the scene, he concluded that the fire was due to faulty wiring. But many speculate the accuracy of these conclusions because forensics were not as advanced in the 40s compared to how thoroughly we can investigate these matters now. And people close to the case have stated that they didn't really look very long while trying to find the remains of the children or to explain what the cause of this terrifying fire may have been. George Sodder wanted to preserve this location as a memorial site for his children, so he ended up covering up the basement area with 5 feet of dirt and turning it into a little garden. The deaths of his children were officially labeled as fire or suffocation for the cause of death. It was what the coroner stated on the death certificates that were made for each of those 5 missing kids. Gee whizzlers, I mean, this family blinked and the quantity of offspring was sliced in half. How do you get over something like this? Okay, so we need some explanations here. Like, what happened? How did this fire get started? What is going on? This family is totally confused, right? Well, the case was not so black and white, open and shut, because there were a lot of strange things that had happened before the fire that kind of added layers to the perplexity of this case. According to reports, in October of 1945, just a few months prior to Christmas, before this fire happened, there was an encounter with a man that seemed like a bone-chilling coincidence. An insurance salesman was visiting them. This guy's name was Fiorenzo Gianutolo, who had previously been an employer of George Sodder. He pitched that George should consider purchasing life insurance for his family, and George declined this offer. When rejected, Fiorenzo became irate. Now, remember when I told you that George had a reputation for engaging in arguments with people about Mussolini and his political views? This is where it came back to bite him, because the insurance salesman said this cryptic statement when he realized that he was not going to convince George to purchase any insurance. The salesman told him his goddamn house would go up in smoke and that his children would be destroyed. He also stated that George would be paying for his dirty remarks about Mussolini. Now, when Fiorenzo made these threats, George didn't really take him seriously at all because he was very used to pissing people off with his views. Around this time, there was another visitor who was a stranger looking for some hauling work, and that guy was checking out the house when he wandered off to the back of the property, and he gave a warning about some fuse boxes that he thought looked dangerous. He told George that the fuse boxes were going to cause a fire someday. Was this just a weird coincidence that these two men were mentioning fires? Well, George could make no sense of this take because they recently had an electric stove installed in the house, and during that process, he had the house rewired. In fact, the power company had checked everything and said that things looked to be safe and in working condition. So, what do you make of this? Now, I'm not sure what to think about these two guys. On the one hand, the insurance salesman sounds all kinds of sus to me. He only flipped out on George after he refused to buy the insurance, so I could see why he would be motivated to say nasty, scary things things to George, but like the laborer, he didn't seem to have a reason to be threatening. What are the odds that both of these men would mention something about a fire pertaining to this home? Then, just a few weeks before Christmas, so this is after the men have come and visited this property and left, the elder boys in the family noticed that a man in a strange car parked along the main highway, US Highway 21, and some reports say that it was a man and some say that there were multiple people in this car, but nonetheless, the boys remembered that whoever was in the car were watching the younger kids coming home from school. Ew. On January 6th, after the fire, a funeral was held for the 5 still missing kids, but the parents were just too distraught to attend it, so the rest of the living children went to the funeral on behalf of their family. That is just devastating. What a horrible situation to find oneself in. This poor family. Well, this is not the end of the tragic tale of the Sodders, as you can tell by the length of this video. We still got a ways to go. We've got all sorts of outlandish theories to dive into, and we're going to start with the Sodder family itself and their speculations specifically. So there were many things that this family was questioning as they started to rebuild and tried to get their lives back on track. As a mother, I can especially relate to Jenny's dedication to trying to find out what happened here. She needed an explanation for what happened to her 5 babies. Jenny could not accept that all 5 of those little ones died in a fire without leaving behind a trace of their tissues, bones, teeth, flesh, clothing, nothing. She did not see the logic here. She's reading the local paper where it detailed a similar house fire that killed 7 people, but the skeletal remains of all of the victims were still identifiable afterwards. How do you explain that? She went so far as to do her own experiments in which she burned animal bones using chicken bones, beef, and pork chops, but even when she tried to burn those bones down to ashes, it didn't work. She still had remnants of bones left. Another factor was that there were appliances that were found in the basement which were still identifiable, despite the entire basement having gone up in flames as well. And somebody who worked at a crematorium told Jenny that even after bodies are burned for over 2 hours at 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 1,093 degrees Celsius for anybody outside the US who does real math. So basically, the crematorium worker advised that even under those circumstances, there would still be some bone fragments left behind in the ashes. Bruv, do you see why this woman is like, none of this don't make no kind of sense? How can my children be burnt to nothing if the fire only burned for 45 minutes? Yeah, I would have some questions about this too. Now, the 45-minute timeline is also something that we need to scrutinize because the family insists that within 45 minutes, the whole house was burnt down. But later, Chief Morris and some of his co-workers would say that there were still fires burning on the sites hours afterwards, but I don't know who's more credible here because y'all didn't get to the scene until 8 in the morning, bro. The people who were there are insisting the entire house was ashes by the time 45 minutes had passed. So now George is also questioning some things like why both of his trucks failed to start that night. And George is wondering if maybe somebody had messed with his vehicles. And he did have a suspect. You see, a telephone repairman informed the Sodders that he thought their phone lines didn't burn at all, but that they were actually cut. And would you believe it? There was actually a witness who stated that he saw a man taking a block and tackle that was used for removing car engines, loitering around the scene of the fire. Oh, really? Could this be why those trucks were not starting up, perhaps? Well, I guess they could have checked that out by looking to see if the engines were damaged or removed. Did nobody think to do that? Because I don't know nothing about cars. They actually identified the man who stole the block and tackle, and he admitted to cutting their phone lines, and he said that he thought that they were the power lines. Why the hell would this weirdo climb up a 14-foot pole at night where he had to reach up an additional 2 feet to cut this line on Christmas Eve? Homie was up to no good. I'm telling you, he is sus. But whatever the case, I did hear a theory that came from one of George's sons-in-law who says it's possible that the Sodders may have flooded the engines of their trucks due to the frenzy going on at the time. Now, if you're remotely familiar with how car engines work, then you know exactly what this means. But if you're a little less stupid than I am when it comes to motor vehicles, then you have no idea what flooding the engine entails. So here's how my mechanic friend explained it. When somebody floods a car engine, it means that there is an excessive amount of fuel in the engine's combustion chamber, making it difficult for the engine to start. This situation typically occurs when too much fuel is delivered to the engine and not enough air is present for proper combustion. Here's how it generally happens. According to my friend, if someone repeatedly tries to start the engine without success, especially in quick succession, excess fuel can accumulate in the combustion chamber. During unsuccessful start attempts, the fuel may not fully ignite, leading to a rich air and fuel mixture. The unburned fuel can flood the spark plugs, making it even more challenging for the engine to start. The excess fuel can also flood the combustion chamber, preventing the necessary airflow for proper combustion. So we may have a possible explanation here on what could have prevented the cars from starting, although to me, who has a car IQ of 5, the explanation is still total gibberish. And don't feel alone if you're listening to this saying, "Amen, sis, I have no idea what the hell none of that means." Now, what about the official report stating that the fire was a result of faulty wiring? You would think this meant there would be no power to the home, but other than the phone line having been cut, which they only learned later, wouldn't that mean that the rest of the lights in the house should not have been working either? Well, when the fire started, the Christmas lights on the tree were still working before the fire consumed it. There were also reports that the woman who called just before the fire started, she was located, and she told authorities that honestly, she just dialed the wrong number that night and she had no connection to the Sodder household. Another Now, just when you thought it was over, oh no, there's more to dig through. Goodness, this poor family cannot seem to catch a break. So during the time after the fire, they did turn this site into a memorial garden for the children who were missing. The mom, Jenny, she would end up tending to this garden for the rest of her life. However, people started coming out of the woodworks with their own theories that made the family start to question not just why this happened, but if their missing kids perhaps weren't deceased at all. So now the timeline starts in 1946, about a year after all of this happened with the fire. While the family was visiting the property after the fire, they found a hard rubber object in the yard now that the snow had melted and the ground was visible. Remember when Jenny had woken up in the middle of the night because she heard something hard hitting the roof and rolling off of it? Well, George believed that this object was some sort of a bomb used in warfare, such as a hand grenade. How the heck did that end up there? There was a bus driver who also was passing through Fayetteville on Christmas Eve, and he claimed that he witnessed some people throwing, quote, balls of fire at the Sodder house. Despite the fire department speculating that the fire was started because of electrical issues, the Sodder family was adamant that it had really started on the roof, but until that could be proven, it was only another theory. So if the fire had started on the roof though, that would mean that the fire spread from top to bottom. Wow. So by the time the dad ran back into the house trying to get to the other kids and the whole downstairs was just flooded in flames, if that theory is true, that means the entire upstairs was already destroyed. Another witness claimed to have seen the missing Sodder children themselves. One woman who was watching the fire from the road said that she actually saw some of the missing kids looking out of a car window as it passed by while the house was still burning. How creepy is that? I mean, I'm not saying that this woman is lying or telling the truth, but that is a really strange thing to claim if it isn't true. Why would somebody make up a claim like that, you know? I mean, I hope people wouldn't do that, but Casey Anthony keeps saying that she ain't do it, so you never know.
Bruh.
How about this one? Another lady at a rest stop between Fayetteville and Charleston said that she had served breakfast to these children the next morning and pointed out that there was a car in the parking lot with Florida plates, which she found to be unusual. But wait, there's more. At a Charleston hotel, a woman reported seeing the kids' pictures in a newspaper and realizing that she had seen most of them a week after the fire. She said she saw 4 of the 5 missing kids and that they were accompanied by 2 men and 2 women who looked Italian. She stated that she could not remember the exact date, but the entire group had been staying in a large room that had multiple beds in it and had signed in around midnight. She claimed that she tried talking to the kids just to be cordial, but the men that were with them seemed quite hostile and wouldn't allow her to speak to the kids. She stated, now these are her words, "One of the men looked at me in a hostile manner. He turned around and began talking rapidly in Italian. Immediately, the whole party stopped talking to me. I sensed that I was being frozen out, and so I said nothing more." They left early the next morning. Yikers. So is there some correlation here to the fact that one lady said she saw them at a rest stop between Fayetteville and Charleston, so they're on their way to Charleston perhaps, and then the woman who said she saw them at the hotel was located in Charleston. So could this be connected? Was this the same family that these people are talking about that they saw? Of course, we have no way to know for sure if it was the Sodder kids, but could it have been the same group of people that they were seeing? In 1947, they sought help from the FBI, only to be told this was a local matter, and the FBI said that they would help if the local authorities would give them permission to do so. But guess what? The local authorities declined their offer of help. How dare they? A private investigator was then hired by the Sodders, and he uncovered unsettling details. The PI was named C.C. Tinsley, and here's what he found. Mr. Tinsley learned that the insurance salesman who had threatened George about his views on Mussolini was actually part of the jury that ruled this fire an accident. I would say that sounds like a conflict of interest somehow. He would have a great motive to say that the fire was not intentional if he indeed was involved. I bet he forgot to inform the authorities that he had just threatened George and his children only a few weeks ago. Tinsley also found out there were rumors around Fayetteville about Chief Morris having found a heart in the rubble, which he snuck into a metal box and secretly buried, despite reporting to the Sodders that there weren't any remains found at the site. What in the world is going on here? It's alleged that the chieftain confessed this to a local religious leader, who then confirmed the rumor to George. Bruh, this minister is not keeping your secrets, okay? He is snitching for show. So you better think twice before you confess anything to him. When you turn up at home and see your wife got an attitude because she found that naughty video stash that you've been hiding, I'm just saying, she only told this one minister. How did she know to look right under that crusty pile of boxers and socks you refused to pick up in the darkest corner of the closet, Anyway, so now George and his private eye, Mr. Tinsley, stepped to Chief Morris like some badasses. They're like, yo man, we know you've been lying. What you have to say for yourself, bruh? And like the no fire truck driving punk that he is, Chief Morris actually took them to the burial site to dig up this tin can. Nope, hold on. It was a tin box. My bad. This chief is too classy to bury body parts in a can. Come on now, people, focus. When they bring this box's contents to a funeral doctor, he tells them it's actually fresh beef liver, and it had surely never been in the presence of any fire. What the heezy? Listen, whether it's a human or an animal body part, I'm gonna have to question the mental stability of this damn chief of the fire department. Why did you bury it, bro? Like, it's just throw it away. What are you doing? At this stage, it's like the whole damn town sounds sus to me. Y'all letting this man call shots when he cannot even drive the fire truck? Is it any wonder there was another family in town that lost 7 members? Was Chief Morris on call that day too? I mean, I'm just saying, y'all just letting this man bury body parts for no apparent reasons with no explanations. Like, is he a voodoo priest? What is happening in Fayetteville, West Virginia? Fayetteville. Y'all got some splaining to do. You gonna have to do better. Y'all gonna have to make better choices with these officials. Like, what is up with the pastor who's spilling all the townspeople's weird secrets to whoever comes asking? Y'all, do not stop in Fayetteville for nothing. Just drive on through. No rest stops, no bathroom breaks, no drive-through windows. I know it was only 1945 when all of this happened, but people say history repeats itself for a reason, so don't say I did not warn you. All jokes aside, I'm not joking. Don't go to Fayetteville. There was an attempt at explaining what happened with this liver. According to Chief Morris, the most honest genius of a man that ever lived, he stated that he put that liver there at the fire site hoping that some of the Sodders would come across it and just accept that it belonged to one of the kids who went missing and just dead the entire tragedy altogether. Oh, what logic. It was his way of trying to give them peace. Chief Morris, I'm sorry. You sound more and more like a dumbass, a suspicious one at that. Why on earth do you want these people to stop looking for their children when they have had no evidence that they died in this fire? It's just, it don't even sound right. Like, what is you hiding, sir? Please confess it to the pastor so that the rest of us can hear the truth. This dude, the moment I heard that he couldn't drive his own fire truck, I said, he is just waving a huge red flag in everybody's face, unashamed. How dare you admit to the public that you cannot drive a truck? Y'all, if you are a surgeon who has no idea how to draw blood with a syringe, do not admit this for everyone to hear. Keep it to yourself. Sheesh. Just when I'm about to give this dude a pass for redeeming himself with honesty, it's like, this is not it. Fayetteville, y'all gotta do better. Over the years, sightings and tips about the 5 missing children continued to emerge, keeping the family's hope alive. George Sodder saw a newspaper photo of ballet school students in New York City. He was convinced that one of them was his daughter, Betty, the youngest that went missing. He drove to Manhattan in search of this child, but her parents, understandably, refused to speak to him. That is really sad and also kind of scary for that little ballerina's parents. Can you imagine? How would you react if a strange man showed up at your kid's school demanding to see his daughter, who is actually your daughter? That's kind of crazy, but from George's perspective, if there's even a chance that he could find any explanation for what happened to his kids, I cannot blame him for trying to find out who this kid was. I guess there could have been a more diplomatic way of going about confirming this information. It's hard to judge the situation. I hope you and I are never in a situation like this where your judgment would be tested. This is why I don't like to judge people unless they're the town fire chief and can't even drive the damn fire truck, Fayetteville. Y'all should be ashamed. A few more things came up with this case. Guys, I didn't realize there was so much to uncover with this case. I feel like when I'm done going over the details, somebody in the comments is definitely gonna be like, Gypsy, you forgot to mention this theory, this fact, this detail. Good lordy, there's so much here. I had to take a break from recording this so I could gather my thoughts and continue. Like, ADHD mixed with autistic hyper focusing is a strange mental jigsaw puzzle that I have yet to figure out. But we're gonna keep pressing on because this case is too fascinating and mysterious. I'm really impressed with you guys' attention span. I tell you, go ahead and give me a thumbs up if you're still following along. All right, focus, people. Back to the story. George heard about another sighting from a woman from St. Louis, Missouri, who shared that she thought that Martha might be living in a convent there, and somebody else in Texas told people in a bar that he overheard other people talking about a Christmas Eve fire in West Virginia that happened a few years ago. And according to this person, the people who were talking about it, they sounded very incriminating as they were talking about this subject. George even questioned a relative of Jenny's in Florida, who he had heard had children that looked very similar to their kids. But much like the other rumors, there was no merit to any of these claims, and the relative was able to prove to George that these were not his children in their care. Although, I'm inclined to think a relative's kids looking like your kids probably is not that unusual. Now, I'm inclined to wonder at this point in the storyline, could these reports of sightings have anything to do with the fact that George and Jenny at this stage had bought that billboard post that we talked about earlier, which was on Route 16 for the next 40 years. They also circulated flyers for the missing kids, which stated that there was a reward for information that led to the recovery of the kids. The reward went from $5,000 at first and then doubled to $10,000 very soon after. Did some of these people hear about the reward money and they were like, I saw them too, they was in my backyard? I don't know, I'm just saying. So there was another woman in Texas who'd written a letter to the Sodders, and in it she detailed how there was a young man who was living out there. When he had gotten drunk, this man admitted to her that he was actually the missing son, Louis. Louis, when he went missing, was about 10 years old. She assumed that this man and another one of the missing brothers, Maurice, were living somewhere in the state of Texas. Even though George and his son-in-law were able to track down these two young men with the help of some police in Texas, these guys adamantly denied that they were the missing sons. According to his son-in-law, who was helping George at the time, George did not believe their denials, and this really ate away at him until George passed away. In the same year, the Sodders received another letter that they considered the most relevant evidence of Louis's potential survival. Jenny discovered a letter in the mail postmarked in Central City, Kentucky, and lacking a return address. Enclosed was a photograph of a man around 30 years old, bearing a very strong resemblance to Louis. I'll put the pictures up here on the screen so you guys can take a look at them and tell me what you guys think. There's a lot of people saying that it does look like it could have been an older version of Louis. On the back of that photo, there was a message written on it. It said this: Louis Sodder, I love brother Frankie, little boys, and then numbers and letters. What are your theories on what this message could have meant? I'm not sure who brother Frankie was supposed to be. Why did the message mention little boys, and what is the significance of the random numbers written? I don't know what to make of this, but I wonder if it did mean something to the family for them to hold on to this photograph and put so much weight on the message. Did this message itself prompt them to believe that Louis wrote something that only they would understand? Opting to delve deeper, the family enlisted the services of another private detective to investigate the matter in Central City, but unfortunately this detective failed to provide any feedback to the Sodders, and subsequent attempts to locate him proved futile, so he basically just ran off with their money. Despite the lack of updates, the photograph infused them with hope. They discreetly incorporated this into the billboard, omitting Central City and other details from public disclosure to safeguard Louis, because they weren't sure if publishing his possible location could put him in some sort of danger. After all, if their kids had somehow survived that fire and had been living elsewhere this entire time, they couldn't have gone there willingly. They must have been somebody's hostages, right? Additionally, they displayed an enlarged version of that photograph over their fireplace. goodness, what if it wasn't Louis in that picture? That would mean that they had hung up this picture of somebody's son, just a stranger, in their house, thinking that it was Louis all that time. By the following year, George, speaking to the Charleston Gazette-Mail, acknowledged the increasing challenge they faced due to the scarcity of valid information, describing it as akin to hitting a rock wall. Undeterred, he pledged to persist in their quest for answers. In a subsequent interview during that period, he admitted, "Time is running out for us," expressing the urgency of their pursuit for answers. He clarified their simple desire to ascertain the fate of their children. If the Sodder children indeed perished in the fire, they sought closure. Otherwise, the family just wanted clarity on what transpired to explain why they still hadn't recovered any evidence that the kids perished in that fire. Up to this point, the family honestly had a few ideas of what could have happened to their kids, assuming the 5 kids had been abducted. They theorized that perhaps they were victims of political human trafficking, which could have been a possibility, although it's beyond anybody how on earth somebody snuck away 5 whole children alive during a fire on Christmas Eve. That's some top-notch planning right there, like some Ocean's 11 type stuff. Even the guy who cut the phone wires was spotted by a witness after all, and there is no evidence supporting this theory, so nobody can really say. Another one of their speculations is that the children were removed to another location and killed by the insurance man, Fiorenzo, or maybe some other associate that was basically acting out of spite. I mean, killing somebody's kids out of spite for not buying life insurance seems like a huge stretch to me, but maybe there was that political aspect as well, because Fiorenzo cussed him out about George's dislike of Mussolini. I could see how setting the home on fire could look like an act of revenge, but then to go the extra step to abduct the 5 young children, oh no, that just sounds like a whole lot of work and definitely not something that one person could manage to pull off on their own. If there's any validity to this take, I think it makes more sense that a group of individuals would have had to work in tandem to make this operation successful. It's such a mystery, you guys. Or is it? In 1969, George Sodder sadly passed away. Following his death, Jenny, the mom, and her surviving children persisted in their quest for answers regarding the fates of these missing children. However, her eldest son, John, rarely spoke of the fire, and he advised the family to accept what occurred and just move forward. This had to be so hard for the children who were left behind, watching their parents spending money and energy trying to chase down leads all their lives to learn more about what had happened to their siblings. I'm always torn about stories like these with like missing kids, or when one of the kids dies or something and like, you know, they got murdered or something. We often hear about how like the parents end up dissolving their relationships, and a lot of times the children who are not missing may have this experience of feeling like they're always living in the shadow of their missing siblings. Like sometimes it's like the parents become so obsessed trying to find justice and closure that they kind of emotionally can neglect the other children who are still alive, needing their parents' care and attention. And as a sibling, you might not feel like you can just demand that your parents give you the attention that you need, because it could feel like you're telling them to forget about the other sibling that's still missing, deceased, or in danger in some way. This is just a really hard thing for anybody involved to cope with, I imagine. Ay. Well, now we get to the end of this mysterious tale. After George Sodder's demise, Jenny remained in the family home, securing it with fencing and expanding its capacity. It was like she was burying herself within the confines of her home and alienating herself from the outside world. Throughout the rest of her life, she maintained mourning attire, dressing only in black, and she tended to that garden on the site where the house once stood. Upon Jenny's death in 1989, the family decided to take down the weathered billboard. The surviving Sodder children, along with their own offspring, continued to raise awareness about this case and explore every lead that they came across. Collaborating with older Fayetteville residents, they speculated that the Sicilian mafia might have attempted to extort money from George. Furthermore, some theories suggest that the kids might have been taken back to Italy. The family believes that if the children had survived and were aware of their parents' and siblings' survival, they might have deliberately avoided contact to protect them from potential harm. Or maybe the children believed their entire family had gone up with the flames that broke out in the home. Maybe whoever took them told them whatever they needed to tell them in order to keep the kids from looking for their family. In 2021, the youngest and last surviving sibling, Sylvia, who was only 2 at the time that the house burned down, she passed away. Prior to her passing, she insisted that her earliest memories were of that night. She recalled watching her dad frantically running around with blood dripping from his face, screaming for her missing siblings. How traumatizing must that have been? Up until her death, Sylvia also remained skeptical that her siblings truly died in that fire. The family's relentless pursuit of answers continues, marking an enduring chapter in the unresolved disappearance of the 5 Sodder children. Netizens who have been studying the details of this case have a lot to say on the matter. I've seen quite a few suggestions that the family was simply in denial about the fact that the kids were consumed in the fire. I can understand why folks would draw this conclusion, and at times while researching, I also found myself thinking, really? You really think that the kids were abducted? Where's the logic here? But even so, I just can't ignore these strange incidents surrounding the fire itself. It's just so mysterious how it got started, and I think the key to learning anything legit stems from the conclusivity of how the fire broke out in the first place. Hear me out. If the fire was actually an accident, as the fire chief who can't drive the fire truck wanted everybody to believe, then we can assume that the kids likely died in the fire and just weren't found among the ashes for some reason. Although, this seems so weird to believe because we know it's highly unlikely that 5 bodies in that rubble would leave behind absolutely no trace evidence. Like how? And why all the silly antics, burying cow parts and lying to this family to make them stop wondering? That just seems like a lot for city officials to be doing, but I wasn't alive in the 40s, so maybe that was just part of the culture back then. On the flip side, if the fire could be proven to be deliberate, I think there's more merit to the idea that the kids were removed from the site by someone. The oldest child who disappeared was Maurice, and at the time he was only 14. But could he have orchestrated the entire thing so that he and his siblings could run away together? I mean, the theory seems so outlandish to me, especially considering we don't have any reports of what a possible motive could be for the children to want to run away, but maybe they were inspired by their own dad, George's departure from his home country at only 13 years old. Dad was able to figure it out on his own, so why not these 5 kids working together but led by their brother Maurice? You know, sometimes when you're a kid and things just don't go your way, you fantasize about a Huck Finn type lifestyle where ain't no grown-ups around just bossing you and controlling everything you do. Like I was talking about earlier with Katt Williams, he left home at only 13 years old, and he said he knew for a while that he was gonna have to leave home because him and his father were just butting heads constantly. They had very different religious views, so he knew if I continue living in this man's home in his care, I gotta follow his rules, and I refuse to live a lie. So he just knew he had to leave. I never heard anybody explore this theory, but it's as ridiculous as the idea that somebody went through all this trouble to smuggle the kids to Italy for revenge. I'm just putting it out there. And if that could possibly be something that would have happened, maybe Maurice and his siblings didn't agree on the views that their dad had about Mussolini. Maybe they were brainwashed by other Italian people in the community, and somehow somebody talked them into setting this whole thing up so they could run away and start a new life someplace. Maybe that's why people thought that they were seeing these kids, you know, somewhere else with some other Italian-looking adults that were maybe smuggling them away. Who knows? This case was absolutely a wild one. There's so many twists. It's not simply a fire and death report, so I have a lot of mixed emotions and thoughts about this one, but I hope whoever is a part of this family now, I'm assuming that there are some children and offspring that came about from the remaining siblings of the family, but my prayers do go out to that family, and I hope that things are easier for them, and I really hope that somehow they do find real answers, or at least find a way to have some peace about not knowing exactly what happened. Do you think this case is as mysterious as the family saw it, or do you agree with the people on the internet who believe that the Sodders just couldn't accept the reality that their children perished in those flames? Tell me what you think in the comments, but please be respectful with each other if you choose to have a discussion, because this channel is a safe space for people to express themselves, and we should never feel attacked for our opinions. If there's anything I forgot to mention or didn't bring up in this video, then feel free to fill us in down below as well. Shout out to all of you with an attention span way longer than mine. Leave me a thumbs up if you heard me say this sentence, and drop some suggestions below if there's any other cases that you want me to cover next time. In addition to true crime cases, old and new, our focus on this particular series are any events that led to tragedies, mental health crises, inexplicable outcomes and unfortunate situations that anybody could find themselves in. We want to learn what we can from these stories. I'm going to share with you my takeaway from all of this. I learned how life can turn upside down in an instant, and to be grateful for every moment that I have with my kids and my spouse. In a blink, they could just be gone, and none of us know how much time we have in this realm that we call life. So be good to your family and loved ones while they're around. Don't take one moment for granted. Try to help your loved ones as much as you can, and don't hire people who can't drive fire trucks to run the fire brigade. Be sure to subscribe if you love content like this. That's all from me, Gypsie Kim, and I hope we all make it to the next video so we can discuss another case together. Ciao!